Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
If you are feeling even the slightest bit drowsy this afternoon, I invite you to contemplate our next speaker's outfit, especially his shoes. That will surely waken your consciousness and bring it to another level. If you don't believe me, it's a travesty that we have this. There they are. Look at these shoes, friends. Emanuele Coccia has just elevated your consciousness. It's a travesty that this podium will obscure them from view. Perhaps we can get a webcam, Robbie, on Emanuele's shoes next time, I promise. Okay, it is, to borrow a word from Ralph Waldo Emerson again, it is a delight to introduce, I can't yet call him my friend. He's someone I'm hoping to make my friend. So I will simply say, Professor Emanuele Coccia, who is a philosopher, who is a philosopher and lecturer at l'École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. He is the author of 4 books: Sensible Life, A Micro-Ontology of the Image; The Life of Plants, A Metaphysics of Mixture; Metamorphoses; and Philosophy of the Home, Domestic Space and Happiness. You can tell from these titles that his interests are indeed wide-ranging, from plants to fashion, from distant stars to domestic spaces. He is also involved in a number of artistic collaborations across different media, film, photography, and fashion, among others. And across all his many interests and collaborations, he brings his truly unique philosophical voice, a voice I first heard speaking through The Life of Plants, a book I cannot recommend highly enough. His provocative reflections on breath, immersion and mixture, air and water, the fish as the paradigm of life, plants and stars, all of these have been my constant companion for several years, and I suspect they will be for several years to come. Emanuele, I want to thank you for all that you have done to spark my imagination. I think there are many here who feel the same. It's truly an honor to have you with us. So this afternoon, Emanuele will constellate some of his many interests in our second keynote lecture entitled How to Make Cities with Plants. Please join me in welcoming him.
So I'm honored. Thank you so much, Charles, for this presentation, so generous and kind. I'm honored and happy to be back at Harvard. I'm extremely attached to this place. I had the privilege to teach here for a semester some years ago, and it was actually one of by far the most wonderful teaching experience in my life. But I was, above all, very proud to be enrolled in order to fight on the front lines for Harvard's one and only mission in this planet, to prove to the world that nerds are cool. Very, very cool. Could be actually, you could change the sentence on the emblem and say that preclari sunt studiosi, so nerds and cool in Latin. So and it's beautiful to be present here in this historical day when we are celebrating a momentous and pivotal roundtable for peace negotiation between 2 cultural identities who have often fought among themselves for the title of the nerdiest group on the planet, so the plant nerds and fungi nerds. And of course, since we are also scientists, we could tell if the agreement will work only if there will be in the future mixed marriages and mixed-race children. So let's hope that it will happen. Now back to the topic. And sorry again for these distorted slides. It were much more beautiful. So on January 12, 2024, a team coordinated by Stéphane Rostand and Philippe Descola published an article in Science titled 2000 Years of Garden Urbanism in the Upper Amazon, The article reported the discovery, thanks to LiDAR technologies, light detection and ranging, I'm quoting, the largest urban network of erected and excavated features known in Amazonia, whose beginnings date back to 2,500 years ago in the Upano Valley in Amazonian Ecuador. These were archaeological findings that allowed for much more radical hypotheses than those advanced by other archaeologists and anthropologists such as Michael Heckenberger, Carlos Faustus, or Eduardo Neves, based on other monumental sites in the Amazon, which, quoting again, are all more recent, considerably less dense in terms of features, and not embedded in such a vast and dense communication network, end of quote. The testimonies, this witness of the Upano Valley, materialize another scale of landscape anthropization, where urbanism covers hundreds of square kilometers. There were not only buildings with complex geometries, but an extremely intricate network of roads and connection between what seemed to be actually, or used to be apparently, autonomous villages. So the paradox they formulated, this discoveries formulated, is quite simple yet overwhelming. The Amazon forest, which we consider the most natural and wild space we know, the cradle of planetary biodiversity, is one of the most radical and enduring expression of urban culture. Note well, the idea here is not that it's not the idea of an ecological succession. It's not that the forest is a post-apocalyptic reconfiguration in which trees have invaded the space of a vanished human civilization. No, the forest is the ultra-historical form of the city. A city that has transcended the boundaries of the culture and species that created it, becoming intrinsically transcultural. So this idea should not be a surprise. 385 different ethnic groups have lived in the forest for at least 20,000 years. They live in a not nomadic manner, but of course we in the sense Europeans have trouble to recognize that. But the resistance to thinking about the identity between cities and forest seems atavistic. The very word forest, with which we continue to designate a stable and lasting, and for some people even here, also socialist, association in space of time of different tree species, literally, so this word literally expresses the idea of foreignness to the urban. The term, as you know, comes from the Latin word foris, which means outside. So the forest is the space outside of the city, which would condense within itself everything that is not urban, not human, and therefore has no history and does not participate in any form of artificiality. Yet, for at least a century, anthropology has repeated that things are not really so. Starting from a famous book by Gordon Childe, it has been incontrovertibly established that the urban revolution is the consequence of the invention of agriculture. For millennia, the human species lived in groups of hunter-gatherers. We gathered what we found and hunted other animals. We stayed in one place for a few days or weeks, then migrated elsewhere like birds or wolves. Then something happened, suddenly. Probably the first human groups did not even notice, but something happened. Someone must have fallen in love with some plants. And it is precisely this crazy and inexplicable love for plants and the sense of obligations towards them, the desire to remain faithful to a relatively small number of trees and shrubs, that suggested to those groups to build cities. So it's a love for beings farthest from us that forced us to exchange our most precious good, mobility in space, the possibility to explore the world, with the care of those beings who do not speak, do not move, and constantly grow and change shapes. In this ethnographic evidence, there are at least two counterintuitive ideas. The first is that It is the garden that invented the city and not vice versa. It's by learning to cultivate different plants, that is by establishing lasting relationship over time with plants, that the human species invented what is its greatest and most enduring artifact or work of art, the city. The garden is not the temporary interruption of urban fabric, it's its spatial and temporal origin. The Big Bang from which millennia ago, Boston and Dakar, Beijing and Rome, Sydney and Tokyo were born. They are all kids of some original garden. So the city is a consequence of a garden, and it's with garden that politics started. The second idea is that in reality, the invention of the city is a very strange form of love for the life of species that belong to a different kingdom, to the kingdom of, for a kingdom different from our kingdom. The city is a crazy and inhuman declaration of love and fidelity to plant life. One could say that the city is a form of Bovarism in the sense that Flaubert, so the author of Madame Bovary first, and then Charles de Gautier, later gave to this term in the sense of the pathology of people believing to be someone else that they actually are. So the fact we are actually vegetal Bovarists. With every time that we are building cities, we believe to be plants, whereby we are animals. So we are in this Emma Bovary form of life toward plants. And that's why we love cities. Biologists have long noted that we owe many things to trees. It's because of the need to cling to the branches of the tree canopies in which we used to live, that the primate that gave us birth, as in the sense of humanity, learned to oppose the thumb. It's because of the same canopies, because of the fact that the same canopies were our first habitat, that we have the eyes so close the one to another, because we need to see like the visual depth, and we don't have eyes like here on the opposite side like birds. So our anatomy has been sculpted by trees. They are artworks in a way. But the city is a cultural gift and not an anatomical one that plants have offered us. After all, the human being is the only and sole animal species that has woven such a deep cultural relationship with the plant kingdom. We do not limit ourselves to eating and using plants, to building objects with our bodies, to dressing with our corpses. We are also the only form of animal life that has culturally vegetalized itself. Like in a grim fairy tale, we have somehow married plants, and we've got children from them, the cities. So even if you want to divorce with them, you will have to deal with the mother or father till the end of your life, as any divorced parent knows. So if talking about plants is a part of theology, as Charles and Rachel suggested this morning, then it's more sacramental theology. We need family counseling more than systematic theology. And if, as Merlin recalled, the opposition between conflict and symbiosis is naive, it's because deep down every marriage is a strange combination of both, so conflict and collaboration. So now, like all love stories, even the one between human beings and plants is full of tensions, quarrels, pettiness, tragedies. And every love story worthy of itself knows the contempt and the disapproval of relatives, friends, strangers, priests of any religion, or mere and casual relationship. Even in anthropology, this phyto-anthropological love story has encountered strong resistance and great moralistic criticism. Its mass extreme form, it's really ugly to look at. Anyway, it's not my fault. In its mass extreme form, this injunction, according to which this marriage must not take place, was expressed by the American anthropologist Paul Shepard, who shamelessly recognized agriculture as the ecological disease par excellence, the cause of all the evils that the human species has inflicted on itself and to the world. James Scott, who took up this idea, writes that the adoption of agricultural life condemned humanity to the loss of the richness of the experience of the world and freedom. Once Homo sapiens took the fateful step into agriculture, he writes disconsolately, our species entered on an austere monastery whose taskmaster consists mostly of the demanding genetic clockwork of few plants. So very pessimistic idea of agriculture. So these conclusions are based on two assumptions. The first is that hunters, that is human beings who deal only with animals, are actually more naturally human than farmers adapting to plant life. That the fact that adapting to plant life is a form of constraint against nature. The second idea is that biological kingdoms are morally impermeable. Animals must live as animals, plants must live as plants. There is and must not be communication between them. And it's an argument that we've heard even this morning. And it's not a scientific argument, it's purely moralistic argument. So as you know, people won't stay pure. I would like to try to reverse the famous invitation that Marc Logier's, the famous theoretician of architecture, formulated in the 18th century when he wrote that il faut regarder la ville comme une forêt. So you have to observe, to look at the city as a forest. I would like to invite you instead to look at the forest as a city. I would like to try to draw all the consequences of the clear evidence that our cities are the illegitimate son or daughters of this forbidden love between human beings and plants. They are bastard, hybrids, and ambiguous figures, which, like all mestizos, have the virtues of both parents. So the first important consequence is that the relationship to plants, you can call it agricultural, horticulture, gardening, phytophilia, or however you want, is not a tangential urban fact, it's the original urban fact, the premise and the form of all cities. Urbanism is originally a vegetal reality. It coincides with a process of mutual domestication in which human beings and some plant species choose each other and become their reciprocal home. The domestication comes from the word domus, which means home. So to create a city is necessary. It's necessary to become friend and home to plants and vice versa, allowing them to domesticate us. From this point of view, the opposition between city and countryside is illusory. The countryside is not opposite of the city, but a reduced and rarefied and a little bit neurotic form of the urban phenomenon. The countryside is a technique of interspecific or interkingdom association in which everything is subject to control. I mean, in the countryside, you control how many plants, which species, which pace those plants are obliged to grow, and when they have to disappear. So it's like it's not more natural or more like, I don't know. It's just a city. In a way, it's like the opposition between a huge metropolis like New York and a suburb in the middle of nowhere in Italy, where everybody's controlling everybody, who is having sex with everybody. So from this point of view, the opposition is just a question of intensity and not a question of distinction of nature. And from this point of view, the Amazon forest is much closer to the contemporary megalopolis, to congestion and excessive density that make any control strictly impossible, than to this interspecies polis that we have called countryside. And for this reason, the solution to climate change is not to replace cities with the countryside, but to design cities more radically, to extend the culture of urban congestion to a culture of congestion of species density and biodiversity. Like the Amazon forest, future cities must become a sort of magnet for members of the plant kingdom that allows them to domesticate us. So what the urban complex of the Upano Valley, and more generally the history of the Amazonian ethnic groups reminds us, is also that marriage is the love that manages to withstand the test of time. Outside of the metaphor, what I want to say is that to think about the equation between forest and city, which is a cultural fact and not a natural one, it's necessary to introduce a temporal factor. On the one hand, the urban complexes of the Opano Valley demonstrates that the life of a city must never be reduced to the expression of a single human culture. No, it's like the Amazon is a city, but it's a city that passed through different human cultures, passed through different species. That's the very interesting idea in a way. It's an evidence, it's not even just an idea. So it's precisely because a city is always born as an association between the human species and plants that it will be forced to express over time and space something more than a simplistic ethnic and cultural heritage. In some way, it reminds us that the nature of the megalopolis is always trans-cultural and trans-ethnic because it's always trans-specific. So in a way, to take seriously this identity of the Amazon forest and the city obliges us to rethink cities as something which overcomes, I mean, the administrative idea of cities. And today it's important to diffuse the link between the city ethnic culture and cultural identity because for strategic reasons, even the left has started to think about ethnic and cultural identities in substantial rather than positional terms. And we often hear that even from anthropologists, a series of qualitative and ontological definitions of human cultures, but yet as Levi-Strauss and Stuart Hall has taught, cultures are always arenas of struggle, fight, transformation, and mixing. They are not a set of beliefs, but they are processes of transformation and metamorphosis of ideas that always come from elsewhere. They are gardens, and like gardens, they are a set of strangers and migrants. Cities are the perfect incarnation of this technique of mixing and mutual invasion of different cultures, and the Amazonian example expresses it perfectly. This is why, rather than continuing to use spatial metaphors, we should start using horticultural metaphors and, in order to talk about cities. And we have to talk about cities in terms of grafting. This is what Ginny Gang recently proposed in a very beautiful book. I think everybody knows Ginny Gang. She's teaching here at GSD, and she's an amazing Chicago-based architect. And among her works, there is something you probably know, which is like the extension of the Natural History Museum in New York. She's the one who did the part behind the entrance. And and the idea in this book, in Ginny's book, is that the city is always a graft. So the practice of grafting is something extremely common. You couldn't drink wine, as you know, if there weren't for grafting, but extremely distinct from a biological point of view. First of all, grafting is the proof that life can circulate in genetically and taxonomically different bodies. Life is capable of nourishing two bodies that are completely different in species, form, genealogy, and origin. This is grafting. You're putting, it is like to take your body and put them in, on the legs of a good football player. So this would be amazing. So, for the ones who love football, at least. And grafting demonstrates that this problem of life is not space, but the continuity of this circulation between stranger bodies. Grafting is also interesting because in a way, you are imagine like grafting in vineyards, you are producing something where the future of a plant has nothing to do with its past. So it produces a total different discontinuity between past and present. So the future is not the expression of a history, of a past, is something composed in a way. But why is grafting interesting? Because the taste of wine is better. So taste of life is better through grafting. That's why cities have to be thought in terms of grafting, because we have to improve the taste of our cities. So life explodes and improves when lives are not necessarily compatible, when lives that are not necessarily identical are mixed, producing bizarre, somewhat unnatural hybrids. The third interesting element of the idea of grafting is that it allows to go beyond the idea of repair. Grafting means pruning. It means being aware that sometimes the best way to prolong life is not to restore something that is broken or in difficulty to its original form, but to introduce something new, unexpected, and contextually heterogeneous. Grafting is the very form of modernity, and the city is a practice of multi-specific grafting that has forever changed the balance of life on this planet. So we have grafted our life in the life of the plants, and this has changed the destiny of the planet. This doesn't mean, however, that our relationship with plants is natural. On the contrary, what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is that every time that you try to embrace a tree with serious intention, meaning you want to marry it, the developer in you comes out and start to build new neighborhoods. So you become an engineer. The relationship with plants has made us more artificial, more complex, even more fragile in a way. In short, it has transformed us into real cyborgs. It seems like a provocation, but it's not. As is well known, the word cyborg first appeared in an article written by Manfred Clynes and Adam Klein about the transformation required for a living being to live in space. It was the time of space travel, and Clynes and Klein imagined what does it mean to go to live in a space where you have a hugely hostile environment. The core idea is, in this case, it makes no sense to change the environment. You have to change your own body. It's like you are changing, in a way, your own metabolism in order to live in a environment which is not, or which is too difficult to change. Space travels, the authors write, challenges mankind not only technologically, but also spiritually, in that it invites human beings to take an active part in their own biological evolution. End of quote. The idea expressed is that in the case of relocation to an entirely new environment, rather than merely modifying the environment, it's easier to partially modify the physiological and homeostatic balance of the living being itself by anticipating or avoiding genetic transformation. The authors imagined the example of a fish wishing to live on land. I'm quoting, if however a particularly intelligent and resourceful fish could be found who had studied a good deal of biochemistry and physiology, was a master engineer and cyberneticist, and had excellent lab facilities available to him, this fish could conceivably have the ability to design an instrument which would allow him to live on land and breathe air quite readily. End of quote. The human being traveling in space should do something similar to this fish. I'm quoting again, if man attempts partial adaptation to space conditions, instead of insisting to carry his whole environment along with him, a number of new possibilities appear. One is then led to think about the incorporation of integral exogenous devices to bring about the biological change which might be necessary in man's homeostatic mechanism to allow him to live in space qua natura, end of quote. And Clynes and Klein proposed the term cyborg, which is like the combination of cybernetic organism in order to define this exogenously extended organizational complex functioning as an integrated homeostatic system unconsciously. So in reality, by injecting the plant form of life into our blood, it has made us cyborgs, and it has effectively allowed us to live anywhere in this planet, because it's because of cities that we can live in any form of environment. So that's the idea. We married plants. We decided to be fixed on land. We adopted the same relationship that plants have to space, and this has transformed our physiology. And because of that, we became able to live even in Boston, where it's incredibly cold during the winter and incredibly hot during the summer. So nobody would have chosen this place, actually. So a real marriage can only last if the person who has changed helps the other person change too. What we call Anthropocene is a kind of like that. Our love for plants has changed us, and at this point, it's hard to say if it's a good thing or a bad thing. But we don't have any other choice now but to help plants love us for who we are, to get to where they have to get them to where they have taken us. It's not easy to figure out how to do that and in which manner. I could end by leaving you with this enormous question, perhaps quoting a few lines from a Shakira song for your inspiration. I avoid to quote it, but there is a lot of Shakira song about like, you have changed, we cannot love anymore, and so on. But we are at Harvard, and what's more, in the faculty where they teach us to think about divinity, so something more serious is needed. So Paulo Maiora Canamus, as Virgil beautifully said. Perhaps to understand the way forward, it may be useful to return to an episode from the recent Venice Architectural Biennial, which opened a few days ago. The Belgian pavilion was assigned this year to landscape architect Bas Metz, who is also teaching here at Harvard. It's a coincidence. And the great botanist Stefano Mancuso, who I suppose everybody knows here. And they have created a very curious project. Bas and Stefano introduced a series of tropical trees into the Giardini building. They then connected them to artificial intelligence that allows them to decide independently and autonomously on the regulation of all climatic factors according to their needs. So they decide whether it should rain or not, how much light they will have, what pH the soil should have, and so on. Now, it would be wrong to compare this experiment to a simple improved greenhouse of what since Fritz Wendt has been developed in terms of technology. Stefano was one of the first to show that plants are intelligent, much more intelligent than us, than humans. Monica has also taught us that we have to presuppose that they have feelings, and we have to attune ourselves with their feelings. The plants are even more skilled emotionally than humans. So what is at stake in this very strange experiment? What is the point of connecting plants to artificial intelligence? Aren't they already intelligent enough? In reality, what happened in this space is that for the first time, the most advanced technology we have created has been made usable and available for plants. It is as if we have opened the black box, provided the access codes and passwords, and made our source code transparent to non-human organisms. Of course, this is still a very speculative approach, but there are two important ideas here. The first is that to resolve the disparity created by this excessive identification with plants, we cannot leave the city. Or to put it outside the metaphor, it's not by aspiring to a natural relationship with plants that we will be able to recover our relationship with our partners. We have changed ourselves and cannot go back in what we were. The other idea is that rather than freeing ourselves from technology, we must make it accessible to other species. It's, after all, a matter of inviting our non-human partners to play with our favorite toy. Only then can plants return to live in the city. Thank you.
Emanuele, thank you. That was a tour de force. All right. So if the city is it is the garden that invented the city, and the city has mixed humans and plants, and you want to get away from this moralizing discourse where humans are humans and plants are plants and fungi are animals, and you want mixing. And you invited us to think of this as a form of grafting. My question for you is, what are the, if not limits of grafting, but what are the protocols for grafting? So traditionally when you graft, success, I would imagine, would be defined by whether the graft works. Does life in fact flow through these two bodies? And then does the graft produce something of value? That is to say, and you mentioned wine. Does it taste good? That is, does it serve us in some way? My question for you is, this expanded imaginary of grafting in the city, what is governing or guiding our grafting? And does it matter if we graft ourselves or other beings? If we splice animal and plant or fungi into to ourselves, what constitutes a success or a wise grafting? And are there any guidelines we should have for grafting others? Perhaps we haven't asked that as much as we should with respect to plants, but we have asked it, I think, acutely of animals recently. So should we be asking the same questions of plants that we've asked of animals, or should we relax and just make hybrid animals like we've been making hybrid plants for thousands of years?
Thank you. It's you asked at least 5 questions.
Well,
so
you gave like 20 lectures.
No, it's not. It was not a criticism. It was just that I don't know if I get to summarize the answers in 10 minutes. So first of all, I would say with a joke that there is no rule in love relationships. I mean, you cannot anticipate if a relationship works or not before entering and start living with this other person. That's the tragedy of every marriage or even extra marriage relationship. But I do stress that I'm not using, because it was the question about that, like language policy. I don't use love in terms of a metaphor. I do think that, ecology was born in the 18th century. It was an invention by the students of Linnaeus. So the master, Linnaeus, as you know, is the first biologist who proposed a sort of plan and scheme of how the species are organized and are relating to each other from a logical point of view. His students realized that this relationship is not purely logical, it's sociological. The relationship between a cat and a dog is not just a purely morphological relationship, it's a social relationship. They hate each other, so they have conflict or love. So this is the core insight, this is the core discovery of ecology, that there is a non-human sociability. The main point in the relationship among animals, plants, fungi, whatever, bacteria, archaea, it's a social dimension. That's why, if you think about that, all categories of ecology comes from sociology. Competition, collaboration, said Merlin, conflict, harmony, they are all, so ecology invented this non-human sociology. That's why to speak about love, it's not, a metaphor. It's like, and by the way, Darwin, the invention of Darwin, as you know, is not to have proven that animals or species are changing. What Darwin realized that this change, the change of identities, is based on the social relationship of species. The biggest intuition of Darwin was not to think that species are changing, is that the change of the species is related to the social relations, to competition, which is a social relationship. So that's why, I will stress that love, to speak about love, it's to speak of the deepest form of relationship that species can have, and that also we can have with other species. But again, I don't think that in this case, we should have protocols in the sense that it never works with with love. It's like first of all, there is each of us should surrender themselves to the fact that sometimes it's working, sometimes it's really toxic. But the core idea of my presentation is the fact that what is interesting in the invention of agriculture and then in the invention of cities is that we have now something which has an historical depth. So I was always fascinated by agriculture because I've been trained as a peasant actually when I was young, and it's amazing if you think about that. There are an animal species that decide to invest a huge amount of time to look at tiny plants and to wait until these plants give to them tiny seeds or fruits. So it's really a huge act of love. And this act of love has changed the life of the species, not of some individuals. And we are in this very stressful and complicated relationship because, it's difficult to say, no, let's cancel cities, let's destroy this idea of being like fixed in a space and being dependent from what the plants are giving to us. I would say it's impossible. So the problem is that, to me, is not to invent some guidelines or protocols. The problem is to take cities that are better than others. And the case of Amazonian rainforest is a very good marriage. In the sense of it worked really well. How can we transform cities today into something which is closer to what happened in the Amazon? And it's not just, it's not just a speculative and theoretical project. It's something really that should, involve a huge work of landscape architects, also sociologists, politicians, and so on. And it's not just a question of planting trees. It's also a question of, in order to give perhaps another answer to your question, do you realize that, for instance, I'm living in Paris in a street where there is a huge amount of how do you say in English, platans? Platane, plantain trees. And they are there since at least 100, yeah, of course, on the
trees.
Sorry? Platanus in Latin. Sorry?
Sycamores? Okay, the consensus seems to be that sycamores, not plantains.
I don't remember the English name, but those trees that were introduced in 18th century. So they are extremely old, But nobody thinks that they are living beings. If instead of those trees in the street were like lions, everybody should say, oh my God, this space is so alive. And everybody would give name to those lions. Why don't we give names to trees? It's also a very beautiful exercise because a lot of trees are hermaphrodites. So it's you have to invent ambiguous names who are good for men and female, queer, trans, and so on. Why don't we, in a way, recognize that that Paris is there mostly because of those trees who were there before De Gaulle, before Flaubert, and so on. So this should also change in terms of how do we relate in very informal relationship with the trees which are already there. And in Boston, Boston is a good example because we will go there. So the Arboretum, it's an incredible example of this attitude. We forget that the Arboretum was involved Olmsted, and everybody's speaking about like Central Park, but it's much more interesting, the Arboretum, in order to think the presence of trees in a city, because as you know, in the Arboretum, they know everything about each tree, when it came, from where, and they know everything about the children of these trees. So it's amazing. They are real citizens of this space.
So ask 5 questions and 5 answers you will receive. So I think, sorry to those of you who had your hands up, but we simply have to move on to a coffee break.
Sorry.
No, it's good. There were many gems in those 5 answers. So let's thank Emanuele one more time. Thank you.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.